Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Tonight, we're walking straight into the shadows of Halloween night with 8 true horror stories. Encounters that prove sometimes the monsters on this night aren't wearing masks. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, let's step into the darkness together. Story number 1. I had been driving for hours, my mind buzzing with the kind of restless energy that comes from chasing a deadline and living off too much coffee. The motorway signs blurred past, green and white, reassuring me that Ghent wasn't far, though I wasn't going straight into the city. I only needed a place to pull off, rest my eyes, maybe scribble some notes before the interview I had lined up. When the sign for a rest stop exit appeared, I didn't hesitate. I signaled, eased into the lane, and rolled down the ramp without a second thought. The road curved gently, as they usually do, and I expected to see the usual things: fuel pumps, a cafe, a couple of trucks parked under the sodium lights. Instead, the asphalt spat me out into silence. Ahead of me was a cluster of buildings, gray concrete shells, the kind of abandoned industrial estate you'd expect on the edge of some forgotten town. The windows were hollow squares. No lights, no cars, no movement. I slowed down, thinking maybe I had taken the wrong exit, but the sign had said, "Rest stop." My hands tightened on the wheel as I muttered, "What the hell is this?" I parked near what looked like an old factory office, the engine ticking in the quiet. For a moment I just sat there, my mind arguing with itself. I could turn around, head back up the ramp, get on with my night. But my bladder disagreed, and the dull ache in my head insisted I needed a break. I stepped out of the car, shoes crunching on loose gravel. The air was stale, carrying the faint smell of oil and rust. I tried the nearest door, half expecting it to be locked, but it gave under my hand with a groan of hinges. Inside, it was worse. Dust clung to everything. Chairs were overturned. A desk sat in the middle with papers scattered like someone had left in a hurry decades ago. I froze, suddenly aware of how loud my footsteps sounded, how my breathing echoed. Something in me screamed to get back in the car. I told myself not to be ridiculous, that this was just some disused building, nothing more. Still, I didn't linger. I stepped back outside, ready to leave. When I drove toward the ramp I had just come from, my stomach dropped. The on-ramp wasn't there. Where I expected the clean sweep of asphalt leading me back to the motorway, there was only a chain-link fence topped with rusting barbed wire. I slammed the brakes, heart hammering. I stared, blinked, rubbed my eyes. It wasn't possible. I had just come down it minutes ago. I pulled the car closer, headlights washing over the fence. The asphalt continued behind it, a strip of road I should have been able to reach. My hands trembled on the wheel. "No, no, no," I whispered. I reversed, circled around, thinking maybe I had taken a wrong turn within the site. But every loop ended the same way. Fences, locked gates, blind walls. No exit. I got out of the car again, more desperate this time, walking along the fence, tugging at the metal with my fingers. Cold, solid, unbroken. The only sound was the faint hum of my car engine and my own ragged breathing. Back in the car, I tried the radio. Static. I pressed buttons, scanning stations, but nothing caught. Not music, not voices, just that endless hiss. My chest grew tight. I switched it off, leaving only the sound of my heartbeat roaring in my ears. I tried my phone, though I already knew the answer. No signal. The little bars were gone, replaced with a blank screen. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, forcing myself to think logically. Maybe there was another road leading out, hidden behind one of the warehouses. Places like this had service routes, didn't they? I drove slowly, headlights cutting swaths of light across broken concrete and rusting doors. That's when I noticed it. Lights flickering in the upper windows of one building, just for a second before vanishing. I killed the engine, sat perfectly still, listening. The silence pressed against me. Then came the faintest sound. Footsteps. Not mine, not echoing from my movements, but steady, deliberate steps from inside that building. My throat went dry. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking. No reply. Just the soft scrape of shoe on floorboards somewhere in the dark. I don't know what made me do it, but I grabbed my notebook, the one with my assignment details, the reason I was even on the road, and held it like it was some kind of shield. I crept closer to the building, telling myself it could be a squatter, a guard, anyone normal. The door was ajar, light spilling faintly from within. I nudged it open with my foot and stepped inside. The corridor smelled of mold and iron. Down the hall, a single bulb swung on a wire, buzzing faintly. Beneath it stood a chair, and on the chair a stack of newspapers. I picked one up. My stomach lurched. The date was September 1985, the same year I was in, but the headline read, "Local journalist disappears after last seen driving toward Ghent," and below it was a black and white photo. My face. I stumbled back, dropping the paper. My whole body was ice. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. I tore through the stack. Every issue was the same. Every headline reporting my disappearance in different words. Missing, lost, presumed dead. I didn't even hear the footsteps until they were close. I spun, eyes darting down the corridor. A figure moved in the shadow, slow, deliberate. I couldn't make out a face, only the shape of a person watching me. "Who are you?" I demanded, though my voice shook so badly it barely sounded like me. No answer. Just that stillness, that unbearable waiting. Then the bulb flickered, went out, plunging everything into darkness. I ran. I don't remember how I found the door, how I kept from slamming into walls, only that I burst outside gasping like I'd been underwater. My car sat where I'd left it. I jumped in, turned the key, and floored it, headlights bouncing wildly as I sped through the estate. But every corner looped back to where I'd started. The same buildings, the same fences, the same impossible dead ends. Panic blurred everything. I drove faster, reckless, until I skidded to a stop in front of the office where it had all begun. And there, taped to the glass door, was another newspaper clipping. My hands shook as I read it. "Body found in industrial site. Journalist identified." I screamed, slammed the wheel with my fists, tears burning my eyes. I didn't want to believe it. I refused. I yanked the gear shift and drove again, desperate for any escape. Hours must have passed. My fuel gauge slid toward empty. I thought about leaving the car and walking, but where? The sight seemed endless, stretching beyond reason. Then, as suddenly as it had vanished, the on-ramp appeared. No fence, no obstruction, just the clean sweep of asphalt leading back to the motorway. I didn't question it. I drove up, heart hammering, and merged into the traffic like a drowning person breaking the surface of water. Cars hummed past, ordinary and indifferent, as if nothing had happened. I pulled into the next legitimate rest stop I found, shaking so badly I could barely hold a cup of coffee. My hands left smudges of grime on the paper cup, proof I hadn't imagined the dust, the rust, the fence. I told myself maybe I had hallucinated, maybe exhaustion had played tricks. But when I opened my notebook to jot down what I'd seen, a scrap of old newsprint fell out. The headline was there, clear as ever. "Journalist missing near Ghent." My name beneath it. I never drove that road again. And I've never taken an exit I don't recognize, not once in all the years since. But sometimes, when I can't sleep, I think about those footsteps behind me in the corridor, and I wonder if I ever really made it back, or if I've been living in the wrong version of my own story ever since. Before we jump into the next story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We really need your love and support. Story number 2. I was about 10 miles north of Tijuana when the flashing lights hit my mirrors. At first, I thought I'd done something stupid. Maybe crossed a line too early, maybe missed a sign. I'd rented a small car for my trip down from San Diego. Nothing flashy, just a compact that hummed on the highway. When the lights came on behind me, red and blue bouncing against the empty road, I slowed, my chest tightening the way it always does when police pull me over, even if I've done nothing wrong. I eased to the shoulder and waited. 2 men stepped out. Both wore khaki uniforms with patches on their sleeves that I couldn't quite make out in the half-light. They didn't approach cautiously like regular border patrol I'd seen before. No sideways stance, no polite gesture toward my window. Instead, they walked straight up, fast, purposeful, one on each side of the car. The taller one tapped the glass with a gloved knuckle, and when I rolled it down, he said in a flat voice, "Step out, border inspection." No greeting, no explanation. I hesitated, still clutching the wheel. Something felt wrong immediately. I'd crossed into Mexico through the proper checkpoint just an hour earlier, and I remembered the officers there. Official, deliberate, with badges that caught the light. These men had none of that. Still, my mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a secondary check. Maybe this stretch of road was monitored differently. I didn't want trouble in a country that wasn't mine. I unbuckled slowly and stepped out, trying to look compliant. "Where you headed?" the shorter one asked, his eyes scanning the interior of my car, not me. I told him I was just driving south to stay the night at a small hotel in Ensenada before heading back up. He didn't respond. Instead, he walked around to the trunk, running his hand along the seam. "Pop it." His tone wasn't a request. I opened the trunk. It was empty except for my backpack. He poked at it with his boot, then nodded to the taller one. "He's clear. Follow us." "Excuse me?" I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Follow us off-road," the tall one repeated. His hand rested casually on his belt where a holster should have been, but I noticed the absence of a gun. My throat dried instantly. Every instinct screamed at me not to do it, but there I was, standing on a foreign road, 2 men blocking me in, their vehicle idling behind mine. I told myself to stay calm. Maybe they were leading me to an inspection site. Maybe my suspicion was paranoia born from too many crime shows. I got back in my car and trailed them. The SUV ahead of me turned onto a dirt track branching from the highway. No signs, no lights, just a rut carved into the desert brush. My heart thudded louder with each bump. I thought about turning back, but every time I slowed, their brake lights glared at me until I kept going. A mile in, they stopped. Their SUV angled across the path, blocking me. I put my car in park, but I didn't step out right away. My fingers clenched the wheel, and I debated flooring it in reverse. Then the tall one was at my window again, this time motioning with his hand. "Out. Bring your bag." I stepped out, my legs shaky, my backpack slung over my shoulder. The shorter one had opened their SUV's rear door, and inside I saw nothing but an empty bench seat and floor mats scuffed with mud. No inspection equipment, no computers, no paperwork, just a car. "Sit," he said, pointing to the bench seat. I froze. "Why? What's happening?" The tall one leaned down, his face inches from mine. "Don't make this hard." The way he said it cut through any illusion I had that this was official. My pulse shot up, and I stepped back instead of forward. His hand darted out, gripping my arm hard. Panic flared hot in my chest, and I yanked free. "I'm not going anywhere with you," For a second, none of us moved. Then the shorter one slammed the SUV door shut and took a step toward me. His jaw clenched like he was about to snap. That was when I did the only thing I could think of. I turned and ran. Not toward my car, not toward theirs. I bolted into the scrub brush at the side of the path, legs pumping, sand and gravel slipping under my shoes. Behind me, I heard one of them shout, "Hey!" followed by pounding footsteps. My backpack bounced against my spine as I pushed deeper into the brush. Branches scratched at my arms. I stumbled, caught myself, kept going. My lungs burned, and I knew I couldn't outrun them forever. I veered left, then crouched behind a cluster of rocks, my body trembling so hard I thought it would give me away. Their voices carried through the stillness. "Where'd he go?" one hissed. "Spread out." I pressed my hand against my mouth, forcing myself to breathe silently. Footsteps crunched closer, then paused. The silence stretched until I thought my heartbeats were loud enough to echo. Then, slowly, the sound of boots moved away. I stayed there, crouched, until the footsteps faded completely. Minutes passed like hours. My mind spun with what to do next. My car was back on the track, right next to theirs. I couldn't risk it. My only chance was to head back toward the highway and flag someone down. When I finally stood, my legs wobbled under me. I picked a direction that felt like north and started walking as quietly as I could, pushing through brush, tripping over rocks. My arms ached, and my throat was raw from dry air and fear. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the crunch of my own steps, felt like a warning. After what felt like forever, I saw the faint glow of headlights on the horizon. Relief surged through me, and I stumbled faster, waving my arms as I broke from the brush and staggered onto the shoulder of the highway. A car slowed, then stopped. A man rolled down his window, speaking rapid Spanish I barely understood. I gasped out, "Police, please, border! Patrol! Men! Fake! Help!" He motioned for me to get in. Every part of me hesitated. What if this was another trick? But the lights of his dashboard, the mundane smell of fast food wrappers in the passenger seat, the faint sound of a radio, everything about him felt normal. I got in. He drove me straight to a gas station about 5 miles up, where a real police truck was parked. I rushed to the officers, stumbling over my words, desperate to explain. When I described the SUV, the uniforms, the checkpoint, the officers exchanged a glance. One of them asked me firmly to repeat the details. Then he shook his head. "Senor, there are no checkpoints on that road. Not there. Not at night." The words landed like a punch. My stomach dropped. I asked if they could find the men, but the officer only said, "Sometimes people pretend. Smugglers, thieves, worse." He looked me in the eye. "You were lucky." I spent the next hour sitting in that gas station, sipping water from a cracked plastic bottle the attendant handed me, still shaking, trying to believe I'd actually escaped. Eventually, another officer offered to drive me back to town. When we pulled onto the same stretch of highway, I stared hard at the roadside dirt track, expecting to see the SUV, the fake uniforms, my rental car. There was nothing. Just sand and brush, as if it had swallowed everything whole. By the time I got back to my hotel in Ensenada, the adrenaline had worn off, and the reality set in. I kept thinking about what would have happened if I'd gotten into that SUV. I pictured myself sitting in the back, the door closing, the road ahead disappearing into black. I thought about how my hesitation, my single choice to run instead of comply, might have been the only reason I was alive to tell this. Even now, whenever I think about that night, it isn't the chase that haunts me, or the way my lungs felt like they were going to collapse. It's the silence when they walked away, the quiet moment when I realized they weren't border patrol, and the certainty that if I'd obeyed, no one would have ever known what became of me. Story number 3. I remember pressing my forehead against the cool window of the back seat, watching the blur of rock walls and evergreen trees flicker past as we wound higher into the mountains. My parents were quiet in the front. I could see the set of my father's jaw in the rearview mirror, his hands tight on the steering wheel. My mother tapped her fingers on her lap, as if she were counting something. We'd been driving for hours already, and when the mouth of the tunnel appeared ahead, dark and yawning through the stone, I sat up straighter. I asked my mother how long it would take to get through. She said, "Not long, just a few minutes." But there was a hesitation in her voice that made me uneasy. The car slipped into the tunnel, and the sound changed instantly. It wasn't the steady hum of tires on asphalt anymore. It was sharper, like we were inside a pipe, every vibration bouncing back at us. I waited for the brightness of the exit to show in the distance, a circle of daylight. But after several minutes, all I saw were the twin red glows of a truck far ahead of us. I thought maybe it was just a long one, like the ones I'd heard about in stories my classmates told, so I didn't say anything at first. My father's eyes stayed fixed forward. My mother twisted in her seat once to smile at me, but her smile looked stretched thin. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The radio hissed with static when my father tried to tune it, and finally he switched it off. The silence made the tunnel feel louder somehow, the engine echoing endlessly around us. I asked again when we'd be out. My mother's reply was brisk this time. "Soon, don't worry." But her foot tapped faster against the floor, and I noticed her glancing at the dashboard more often. The fuel gauge was already dipping lower than it should have been. We'd filled the tank not long before, yet the needle looked like we'd been driving much farther than reality allowed. The truck ahead vanished suddenly, like it had been swallowed by the dark. My father muttered a curse under his breath, leaning forward a little as if that would help him see. The headlights carved only a short distance ahead, bouncing off the damp walls that looked exactly the same no matter how long we drove. I started to feel dizzy, like we were circling in place even though the car kept moving straight. My father finally said, "This doesn't make sense. We should be through by now." It was the first crack in his usual calm voice, and it made my chest tighten. Minutes blurred. I counted them out loud at one point, just to anchor myself, but I lost track when I got distracted by a strange vibration under the seat. It was faint, like someone knocking softly beneath the car. My mother snapped at me to stop kicking the floor, but I hadn't moved my feet. I pressed my shoes flat against the carpet to prove it, and the tapping sound still came. Irregular, but steady enough to notice. My father tightened his grip on the wheel and said, "It's the road, that's all." Another half hour seemed to pass. The air inside felt thick, the windows fogging lightly even though none of us spoke much. I started asking if maybe we'd missed the exit somehow. My father shook his head. "There's no turn in a tunnel like this. It has to end." His words didn't reassure me because he didn't sound like he believed them. At one point, my mother rummaged for a map from the glove box, unfolding it across her lap. Her voice trembled when she said, "This doesn't show a tunnel this long." My father didn't answer. He just pressed harder on the gas, but the speedometer seemed sluggish, like the car didn't want to accelerate. The sound of the engine deepened, straining, and the vibration grew worse under our feet. Then, without warning, the lights in the tunnel flickered. I hadn't noticed them before, spaced far apart along the ceiling, but when they stuttered, it felt like the darkness between them stretched longer than it should have. The headlights showed damp concrete, repeating endlessly. My stomach knotted. I whispered that maybe we should turn back, but even as I said it, I realized I hadn't seen a place to turn, not once. There hadn't been a shoulder, no emergency alcoves, nothing, just 2 lanes of asphalt leading forward. The fuel gauge dipped again, almost to half, though we couldn't have burned that much in real distance. My father swore quietly and adjusted in his seat. His knuckles were pale against the wheel. My mother tried to keep her voice steady as she suggested slowing down. But he snapped that slowing wouldn't help. They argued in low voices until I yelled for them to stop. It felt wrong to hear them bicker in a place like this, like the tunnel itself was listening. Time slipped strangely. I grew thirsty, my throat dry from the recycled air. But when I asked for water, my mother just shook her head as though she hadn't packed any. I remembered clearly she had placed bottles in a bag that morning. But when she checked, the bag was empty. It was the same unsettling emptiness I felt when I glanced behind us. The tunnel stretched away in perfect darkness. No cars, no entrance in sight. We were alone. Finally, after what felt like hours, a faint glow appeared ahead. I sat up, hope flooding me, and shouted that I saw it. My father pressed the pedal down, the car shuddering as if reluctant, but we surged toward the light. It grew larger, a clear, round circle. Relief filled the car, even my mother exhaling like she'd been holding her breath. But as we neared it, the circle didn't sharpen. It smeared, like paint bleeding on wet paper. My father muttered, "What the hell?" And the glow spread, filling the tunnel with a white haze. We drove straight through it, and for a second I felt weightless, my ears popping like pressure had shifted. Then the light vanished, and we emerged onto open road. At first I cheered, but my father didn't. He slowed the car to a crawl, staring out the windshield. My mother covered her mouth with both hands. The road ahead was unfamiliar. The signs weren't in Italian anymore. I couldn't read the letters at all. The asphalt looked rougher, cracked in strange patterns, and the landscape on either side seemed barren. Worse, the fuel gauge hovered just above empty. We drove in silence, too stunned to speak. I kept turning to look behind us, but the tunnel entrance was gone, replaced by rocky cliffs that didn't match where we'd been. My father searched for a landmark, anything, but the road just wound on into hills we didn't recognize. Finally, he pulled the car over, shutting off the engine to save fuel. The sudden quiet roared in my ears. When we stepped out, the air was sharp and cold, though it had been summer when we entered the tunnel. My father tried the map again, but none of the roads lined up. My mother whispered that maybe we'd taken a wrong turn somewhere, but her voice was hollow. I kicked at the gravel near my shoes and noticed something that made me freeze, a small road marker planted at the side. The numbers etched on it weren't numbers I recognized. They looked older, almost carved by hand. We waited there for what felt like another hour, expecting another car to pass, but the road remained empty. Finally, my father restarted the engine, and we drove on with the last of our fuel. Eventually, just as the needle touched empty, we spotted a cluster of buildings ahead. Relief swept through us, but as we neared, I noticed how strange they looked. Stone houses with thatched roofs, smoke curling from chimneys like something out of another time. My father stopped the car before we reached them. None of us wanted to go closer. The figures we glimpsed moving between the houses were dressed in clothes I'd only seen in history books, rough and plain, their heads covered. When one turned to look at us, his face seemed gaunt and pale, eyes staring too long before he turned away. My mother begged my father to back up. He did. We reversed slowly until the village disappeared from view. The car sputtered, running on fumes, and we coasted to a stop on the side of the road. I sat in the back seat, clutching my knees, while my parents whispered frantically about what to do. None of their ideas made sense. There were no gas stations, no phones, nothing modern anywhere around us, just that endless road and the eerie silence pressing in. Then, without discussion, my father decided to drive back the way we came, even if the fuel gave out completely. He said, "We can't stay here." His voice was firm, but it shook. We rolled back down the road, the car jerking as the engine gasped its last. And just as I thought we'd be stranded forever, the black mouth of a tunnel appeared ahead. It hadn't been there before. My father didn't hesitate. He steered us inside, the car barely running, and the darkness swallowed us once more. For a terrifying moment, the lights flickered out, and I thought we'd never see daylight again. But then, as if no time had passed, we burst out the other side, onto a road I recognized. The Italian signs returned, the sky was bright, and our fuel gauge inexplicably read half a tank. We pulled over immediately. All three of us stumbled out, shaking. My father knelt on the ground, gripping his head, and my mother sobbed into her hands. I stood beside them, staring at the tunnel we'd exited. Except when I looked back, there was no tunnel at all, just solid mountain rock. We never spoke of it again in detail, not to anyone. My parents dismissed it later as a strange illusion, a trick of memory. But I know what I saw. I know what we all felt in that endless darkness, the way time bent and the world changed around us. To this day, whenever I drive through any tunnel, even the shortest one, my chest tightens, and I hold my breath until I see the light. Because I'll never forget the moment we emerged onto a road that wasn't ours, where fuel burned too fast, and people from another time watched us with hollow eyes. Story number 4. I slammed the heel of my hand against the steering wheel when the engine sputtered out for the third time, leaving me with nothing but silence and the faint ticking of cooling metal. The road behind me stretched back toward Muscat, but I knew I had taken the longer cargo route to shave time, cutting across the desert to reach Nizwa before nightfall. Now my truck sat lifeless in the middle of sand and scrub, with no other vehicles in sight. I tried the ignition again, listening to the crank grind uselessly before giving up and muttering under my breath. Deliveries weren't supposed to go this way. I leaned back, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and pulled my phone from the dash mount. It was one of those chunky early models we'd only just begun to rely on for long-haul routes, the kind with a heavy antenna. My boss insisted we use them in case of breakdowns, so I felt a rush of relief as I powered it up. Signal flickered on, though weak. I scrolled through the numbers written on a paper taped to the dash: company dispatch, roadside assistance, even my cousin who sometimes helped me with runs. I dialed the first. The line clicked, then a faint hiss filled my ear, followed by a voice. It was my own voice. Not a recording I remembered making, but my voice all the same, repeating a phrase in a flat tone. "I can't get out. I can't get out. I can't get out." I froze, phone pressed tight against my ear, every hair on my neck standing upright. I hung up immediately, hands trembling. My first thought was that I'd misdialed, maybe caught some strange feedback. I checked the paper again, pressed the buttons carefully, and called the second number. The line hissed, then I heard myself again, this time whispering, "He's watching me." My throat tightened. I wasn't whispering, not in that moment, yet the cadence, the slight accent, the rasp on certain words, it was undeniably me. I pulled the phone away as though it might burn me. For several seconds I just sat there, gripping it, staring out at the endless beige of the desert. Nothing moved. No one was around. Finally, I told myself it was a network error. Maybe someone had tapped the wrong line, some glitch bouncing my calls back. I swallowed hard and decided to try again, needing to hear a familiar voice. This time I called my cousin directly. The ringing dragged longer, then the hiss returned, heavier now, like someone breathing against the receiver. Then my voice spoke again, clear as if I were sitting beside myself. "Stop calling. He doesn't want you to call." I shouted into the phone, demanding to know who was doing this, asking if someone had tapped the system, but my words never echoed back. Only silence after that one phrase. I threw the phone onto the seat and cursed, heart hammering in my chest. I sat there for several minutes, staring at the desert and listening to the quiet press in. The air seemed heavier somehow, as if even the horizon had turned its back on me. My truck wasn't going anywhere, but staying inside felt worse now, as though the cab itself had shrunk around me. I climbed out, slammed the door shut, and stood with the heat radiating off the metal, trying to ground myself in something real. The desert stretched out in every direction, low dunes, rocky patches, and the faint ribbon of road vanishing both ways. No cars, no sound but the faint wind. I paced a little, circling the truck, telling myself I'd just wait. Someone always came along eventually, and I could flag them down. But an unease gnawed at me. I found myself glancing back at the phone through the windshield, as though it might start ringing by itself. When the urge to hear a normal voice outweighed my fear, I opened the door, grabbed it, and tried one last number, the dispatch office. This time the hiss was almost immediate, followed by my voice again. It didn't repeat a phrase this time. Instead, it said, "You shouldn't have left the truck." My knees went weak. I whipped my head around, scanning the empty road, my palms slick with sweat. I stammered into the phone, "Who is this? Why are you doing this to me?" But all I heard was my own voice draw out in a slow chuckle before the line went dead. I wanted to hurl the phone into the sand and never touch it again, but a part of me was terrified I might need it, even broken as it seemed. I shoved it into my pocket and leaned against the hood, trying to slow my breathing. The desert sun was sinking, the edges of the horizon deepening in color, and I realized that soon I would be alone here in full dark. My legs carried me back into the cab, where I locked the doors and sat in the driver's seat like a man trapped in a cage. Minutes passed, maybe hours, time blurred. At one point I heard a faint ringing. It wasn't my phone, though. Not at first. It sounded like it was coming from outside, distant, echoing strangely. Then I realized the sound was in my pocket. My phone had turned itself on. I pulled it out with shaking hands and saw no number on the screen, just a blank call. Against every instinct, I answered. Static roared in my ear, and then my voice came through, broken, distorted, but still mine. "Don't look out the window." I froze, my head turned on its own, betraying the warning. At first there was only sand, the outline of dunes shifting in the fading light. Then I saw movement, not a person, not exactly, but something pale and low, crawling just beyond the truck's shadow. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I ducked down instinctively, clutching the phone against my chest. I don't know how long I stayed crouched there, listening to my own breath and the blood pounding in my ears. The phone slipped from my hands eventually, clattering onto the floor mat. When I picked it back up, the line was dead. I wanted to believe I had hallucinated it, maybe the heat or dehydration twisting my senses, but deep down, I knew better. Something was out there, and somehow it was using my voice. I stayed awake all night, eyes darting between the windows, every gust of wind sounding like footsteps. At one point, I thought I saw fingers press briefly against the glass, but when I blinked, nothing was there. By dawn, I was hollow-eyed and shaking, but alive. I told myself daylight would make it easier, that I could walk back toward the last checkpoint if no one came by. I had almost convinced myself it was over when the phone rang again. The screen this time showed a number. My home number. I hadn't given it out to anyone except close family. I pressed answer, hand trembling, and heard my voice again. Calmer now, speaking evenly. "You'll never reach them. You're already here." I screamed into the phone, begging it to stop, demanding to know what "here" meant, but the call ended before I could finish. That was the breaking point. I shoved the phone into the glove compartment, slammed it shut, and climbed out of the truck. I started walking. Each step felt heavy, my boots sinking into the sand, but I forced myself forward along the road. Hours passed before I saw another vehicle, a small pickup rattling toward me from the opposite direction. I waved frantically, and the driver, an old man with a lined face, slowed to a stop. Relief flooded me so hard I almost collapsed. He offered me a ride without much question, and I climbed in, thanking him a dozen times. For the first few minutes, I sat in silence, just grateful to hear another person's breathing, another engine running. Then the old man asked where my truck was. I told him it had broken down miles back. He nodded slowly, eyes on the road, and said, "Strange. You're the third man I've picked up out here this year saying the same thing." I frowned, confused, and asked what he meant. He explained that each one of them had claimed their calls wouldn't go through, that the lines played tricks on them, voices repeating. I asked what happened to the others. He gave me a long, sidelong glance, then said quietly, "They never made it back to their trucks." The silence that followed was heavier than the desert air. I sat rigid, staring ahead, realizing that whatever had spoken to me on that phone, whatever had whispered in my own voice, wasn't just my imagination. It had happened before. It would happen again. And though I reached safety that day, delivered to a small roadside station where I could finally call for real help, I never went back for my truck. Someone else towed it weeks later, and I refused to even look at it when they parked it outside the yard. The phone inside was gone, the glove compartment pried open. No one admitted to taking it, but I didn't ask. Some things I never wanted returned to me. Even now, years later, I can't bring myself to answer unknown numbers, because deep down, I know what voice I'll hear if I do. Story number 5. We were already an hour behind schedule when the fog rolled in, thick and heavy, swallowing the road in front of us like a curtain. Peter was at the wheel, leaning forward so close to the glass it looked like he was trying to push his head through it. I sat beside him with the map crumpled in my lap, though it was useless now. Visibility had shrunk to barely a few meters. I could feel the vibration of the old van beneath me, every bump amplified in my chest. Neither of us spoke much. Our voices felt out of place in that muffled silence the fog created, like sound itself didn't want to travel. At first we tried to laugh about it. "Feels like driving inside a cigarette," Peter muttered, the corner of his mouth twitching into a grin, though I could tell it was more nerves than humor. I forced a chuckle, but my hands stayed locked in my lap, restless. The fog wasn't natural. I'd seen fog before, of course, but this moved differently, like it thickened whenever we approached a turn and thinned just enough to tease the possibility of continuing. My chest kept tightening the deeper we went, as though every kilometer pulled us further away from someplace safe. Then came the lights, red and blue, flashing faintly through the haze up ahead. At first we sighed in relief. "Finally, someone else on the road," Peter said, and for a brief moment the tension inside me loosened. The beams cut through the fog like a promise of order, of rules, of someone in control. I craned my neck, expecting to see the shape of a patrol car. Instead, the glow just hovered, pulsing like a heartbeat. The colors didn't sharpen as we drew closer. They just swam in the mist, blurring as though the fog was alive and eating them. We slowed. My pulse drummed against my throat. The lights drifted sideways, as if beckoning us. "They want us to pull over," Peter whispered, though he didn't sound convinced. His hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles pale. I tried to speak, but the words stuck. Something inside me screamed that we shouldn't follow, that this wasn't right. But what choice did we have? We were close to the border, and getting stopped there could mean trouble if we ignored what looked like authority. Petter flicked the blinker, though there was no one to see it, and eased the van to the side road where the colors had slipped away. The van's tires crunched gravel, and the sound was too loud, echoing in my ears. The fog thickened the moment we turned, wrapping around us until I couldn't see the main road behind anymore. "I don't like this," I muttered, finally finding my voice. Peter didn't answer. His eyes darted from side to side, searching for shapes in the whiteness. The lights had gone further in, bobbing gently, always just far enough to keep us chasing them. He followed without asking me. The road narrowed to what felt like a single lane, tree branches occasionally scratching the top of the van. But still he drove on. We Wimes kept expecting to see the outline of a car or officers stepping out to check our documents. Instead, the fog pressed tighter and the lights kept moving ahead. I counted the minutes in my head. 5. 10. By 15, the van's dashboard clock was the only proof time hadn't stopped. My stomach churned. "This isn't a checkpoint," I said. My voice cracked. Peter glanced at me, just for a second, then back at the lights. "Then what the hell is it?" His voice was sharp, defensive. I didn't answer because I didn't know. When the lights suddenly blinked out, I nearly screamed. Peter slammed the brakes and we lurched forward in our seats. Silence swallowed us again. The fog hung like a wall outside, smothering. We sat there, both of us breathing hard, listening for something. An engine, voices, footsteps. There was nothing. "They're gone," Peter whispered. His words felt final, like a verdict. My skin prickled. Every instinct told me to turn back, to drive until the van gave out, but I couldn't even tell which way back was anymore. The fog made the world small, only the hood of the van and a meter of road ahead. Then we heard it. A faint tapping. Not loud, not threatening, just a soft rhythmic knock that seemed to come from outside, near the rear of the van. Peter's eyes widened, and I felt mine mirror his. "Don't get out," I said immediately, louder than I meant to. He froze, hand hovering over the door handle like he had already thought of it. The knock continued. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. I turned in my seat but saw nothing through the windows. The fog pressed against the glass like it wanted in. My hands shook, and I dug my nails into my thighs to feel something real. We sat like that for what felt like hours, though it could have been only minutes. The knocking stopped, and for a moment I thought it was over. But then, out of the mist ahead, the lights returned. Brighter this time, no longer red and blue, now a white glare, sharp and blinding, like a high-beam spotlight aimed straight at us. Peter cursed and shielded his eyes. The light filled the cabin, washed over my skin, and I had the sickening sense that it wasn't just shining, it was searching. "Go!" I hissed. "Drive, now!" He slammed the gear, and the van jerked forward, tires spitting gravel as we sped straight into the white. The brightness swallowed everything. My eyes watered, and I clutched the seat, bracing for a crash we never reached. In an instant, the light vanished, leaving us plunging back into suffocating fog. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. I gasped for air, chest heaving, throat raw. The road ahead finally widened again, and out of nowhere, we were back on asphalt. A sign flashed past on the right. Ostrava, 12. I gaped at it, twisting in my seat. We hadn't seen a single sign since the border. Peter's hands shook on the wheel. How the hell? He started, but his voice broke. Neither of us spoke the rest of the way into the city. The fog lifted as suddenly as it had come, peeling away to reveal the normal world again. Cars, street lamps, people. Everything looked too ordinary, like we had stepped into a place that didn't realize how wrong the night had been. We pulled into a small motel, parked the van, and just sat there for a while. Neither of us wanted to step out, as if the moment our feet touched the ground, the fog would come back for us. Finally, Petter muttered, "We followed something we shouldn't have." His words chilled me because they matched the thought pounding in my skull. In the morning, we checked the van, half expecting dents, scratches, something to prove what had happened. There was nothing. No marks, no gravel dust, no sign we'd ever left the main road. I even ran my hand along the metal, needing to feel something different. But it was clean. Too clean. Peter tried to laugh it off, saying maybe the fog had played tricks on our minds, but I saw the way his hands trembled when he lit his cigarette. He didn't believe that. Neither did I. Later that week, when we finally crossed into Poland for the next show, I asked one of the stagehands about that stretch of road. He looked at me strangely, then shook his head. "You don't drive off into side roads near the border at night," he said flatly. "People disappear there." His words clung to me like the fog itself. I've replayed that night in my mind countless times since. The lights, the knocking, the blinding white. I've tried to find logical explanations. Fog can mess with perception, headlights refract, the mind fills gaps under stress. But none of that explains how we lost time, or how we ended up near Ostrava without any memory of the distance in between. None of it explains the tapping on the van. None of it explains why, even now, when I drive at night, and the mist starts to gather on the road, my hands shake so badly I have to pull over until it clears. I don't talk about it often, but when I do, I say this. We weren't stopped by police, and those weren't warning lights. Something wanted us off the road that night, and we were stupid enough to follow. Whatever it was, it didn't need to show itself to make us obey. It only had to lead us into the fog, and once you're inside it, you can't tell what's real anymore. I'll never know why it let us go, but I've carried that silence with me ever since, the kind that settles in your bones and never really leaves. And the worst part, the part I can't say aloud to Peter, or to anyone else without sounding insane, is that I don't believe we escaped. Not fully. Some nights I wake up convinced we're still in that fog, still chasing those lights, still waiting for the knocking to start again. And when it does, I don't think we'll come back a second time. Story number 6. We were already halfway down the country road when I spotted him standing by the shoulder, his thumb out, his other hand hanging loose by his side. I remember telling Sarah we shouldn't stop, that it wasn't worth the risk, but she looked at me and said, "It's Ireland, not America. People still hitchhike here." Against my gut feeling, I slowed the rental car and pulled over. The man stepped forward without hesitation, his shoes crunching on the gravel. He didn't say a word when he slid into the back seat, but he smiled at us, wide, deliberate, like someone who already knew he had a place in our car. That smile unnerved me more than I cared to admit. I waited for him to thank us, maybe explain where he was going, but he just looked straight ahead, lips pulled back in that expression, as if frozen. His clothes were ordinary enough, dark jacket, worn jeans, but his eyes had a strange intensity, unblinking, as though he was paying attention to everything. I drove back onto the road, trying to act normal, while Sarah glanced at me with raised eyebrows. "So? Where to?" she asked over her shoulder. No answer, just the smile. The silence filled the car heavier than any conversation could have. At first, I told myself maybe he didn't speak English well. Maybe he was shy. Maybe he was just grateful. But when Sarah asked again, "Where are you headed?" he finally shifted his gaze toward her. He didn't speak. He only grinned wider, and that was the moment I felt a knot form in my stomach. Something wasn't right. The man never broke eye contact, never blinked, just kept smiling like he was enjoying some private joke. I tapped the wheel with my thumb, trying to focus on driving, pretending I didn't notice how my wife's hands had started trembling against her lap. Minutes dragged by. I tried the radio to ease the tension, but the signal was static out on those rural roads. I switched it off. The only sound was the tires on the asphalt and the faint, rhythmic breath of the man behind us. It wasn't loud, but I swear it seemed timed, as though he was making sure we could hear it. Sarah mouthed to me, "Say something." I cleared my throat. "We're heading into Limerick. Do you want us to drop you before or after the town?" His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror and met mine for the first time, still smiling. But then, slowly, deliberately, he whispered, "Hotel." The way he said it made the hairs on my neck rise. Just one word, spoken with certainty, like he already knew. My mouth went dry. I asked, "Which hotel?" But he didn't answer. He just leaned back, still grinning, his teeth catching the faint light that came through the window. I tried to laugh it off, muttering to Sarah that maybe he only knew a few words. But deep down I felt something darker. How would he know we were even staying in a hotel? We hadn't mentioned it, hadn't said a word about our plans since he got in. Sarah whispered, "Let's just drop him at the edge of town." I nodded, eager for that moment, though each passing kilometer felt heavier. The road narrowed, hedges pressing close on both sides, and I kept glancing at the mirror, hoping maybe he would fall asleep, maybe he would stop staring. But no, his gaze never wavered. He looked at us the way you might look at an animal you're about to trap. My grip on the wheel tightened, and I told myself over and over that once we hit the first petrol station or pub, I'd pull in and ask him to get out. Then, clear as if he'd been rehearsing it, he spoke again. "Green window." My heart thudded. Sarah's face went pale. Our hotel in Limerick, neither of us had told anyone about it, had a large green-painted window at the front, a detail so specific it felt like he was inside our heads. I forced my voice steady. "What did you say?" He leaned slightly forward, still smiling, and repeated it softly. "Green window." Sarah shook her head furiously at me, mouthing, "How does he know?" I didn't have an answer. I pressed harder on the accelerator, wanting to reach town faster, but the road seemed endless, twisting through farmland with no sign of civilization. My chest tightened with every glance at the mirror, every reminder that he was back there. Silent, except for that grin. At one point, Sarah tried reasoning with him, saying, "We'll drop you near the river. That's where most of the hotels are." He didn't nod, didn't speak, just watched her, eyes wide, teeth exposed in that unnatural smile. It wasn't the expression of someone grateful for a ride. It was the expression of someone waiting for something inevitable. I started sweating despite the cool air. My thoughts scrambled. Should I stop and order him out? What if he resisted? What if he had a weapon? Every scenario played out in my head, none ending well. Sarah's hand squeezed my thigh, urging me silently to keep driving. My pulse hammered in my ears. Finally, lights appeared ahead, a cluster of buildings. Relief surged through me. But then, as if reading my mind, he leaned forward again, his lips nearly brushing Sarah's hair, and whispered her name. Not mispronounced, not guessed, spoken perfectly, intimately, as though he'd known her for years. She screamed, jerking away, and I nearly swerved off the road. My hands shook violently on the wheel. I shouted, "How do you know her name?" But he didn't answer. He simply sat back, his grin unbroken, eyes fixed on me in the mirror. I can't describe the terror of hearing your wife's name from a stranger who should have no possible way of knowing it. Sarah clutched my arm, begging me to stop the car. I couldn't think straight. If I stopped, what then? If I kept driving, how far would this go? When we reached the edge of Limerick, I spotted a small Garda station, a local police post. I didn't hesitate. I pulled into the lot so sharply the tires screeched. Sarah threw open her door and ran inside, screaming for help. I turned to the back seat, ready to confront him, but the space was empty. The door hadn't opened, no sound of it clicking shut, no footsteps. He was just gone. The car smelled faintly of damp earth, like soil, and the seat where he sat was slightly wet. My chest felt like it would cave in from panic. 2 officers rushed outside with Sarah and searched the area. They checked the back seat, the lot, the road behind us. Nothing. One of them frowned and asked if maybe we were tired, had missed someone walking away. But Sarah insisted. He had been there, he had spoken, he had known things no stranger could know. They took our statement politely, maybe thinking we were hysterical tourists. When they asked which hotel we were staying at, Sarah refused to answer. She was too afraid that somehow he was still listening. That night we barely slept. Every creak in the hallway felt like him coming closer. Every car that passed outside made us jump. We double-locked the door, shoved a chair against it, and still I couldn't shake the memory of his smile. I kept replaying his words. Hotel, green window, Sarah's name. It wasn't possible, yet it had happened. The next morning, desperate for reassurance, I went down to the front desk and asked the clerk quietly if anyone had asked about us. She looked puzzled, then said, "A man was here last night, asking for you by name, said you'd promised him a lift." I felt my blood run cold. I asked her to describe him, and her words nearly made me collapse. Dark jacket, worn jeans, intense eyes, and a smile that didn't fade. She said she told him we had checked in, but when she turned back to fetch the register, he was gone. No footsteps, no door opening, just gone. I begged her not to tell anyone else our room number. Sarah wanted to leave immediately, but I couldn't even decide what was safer, staying put or driving off into the unknown. We ended up cutting our trip short and leaving Ireland the very next day. Even on the plane, Sarah kept glancing at the aisle, half expecting him to be there. It's been years now, but I still dream of that smile. Sometimes I wake in the night convinced I hear his whisper in the dark, saying green window, or worse, saying Sarah's name. I can't explain who he was, how he knew, or why he chose us. But I know this. When you see someone standing on the side of the road, smiling as if they already belong in your life, don't stop. Because once they're in the car, you might never get rid of them. Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. Story number 7. I was running low on fuel when I saw the small station come up ahead, the only one for what felt like 100 kilometers in either direction. My tank light had been blinking for the last half hour, and I was starting to calculate how far I could push it before I'd be stranded in the middle of the outback. The sign for the station was faded, half its letters missing, but I didn't care. I just needed diesel. I pulled the truck up to the pump, relieved to hear the faint tick of it working. My first thought was simple. Thank God I'll get out of here before nightfall. I stepped down, stretched my legs, and took hold of the pump handle. It worked. Diesel flowed as if the place had been open all day, and I figured maybe the owners just left it running with some kind of honor system. Still, it struck me as strange that the pump looked modern, not dusty or worn like the broken sign. I filled the tank halfway before deciding I ought to pay or at least check inside. Old habits. You don't want to be the guy who drives off without paying, even if nobody's there. The glass door to the shop was smudged, but I could see shelves inside. When I pushed it open, a wave of cool, stale air hit me. The place looked wrong the second I stepped in. It wasn't just old. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Products on the shelves had packaging I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Dust coated everything, a thick layer you couldn't fake. There were magazines by the counter, their covers yellowed and curling, with dates from the early 80s. My first reaction was confusion. How could a pump outside be modern and functioning when the inside looked abandoned 30 years ago? I called out, "Hello?" No answer. My boots echoed across the cracked linoleum. I walked to the counter and tapped the bell that sat there. But it made no sound, like the clapper inside was missing. I stood still for a moment, listening. The hum of the fridge in the corner was gone, though it still had faded Coca-Cola branding across the front. The silence had a thickness to it that made me shift uneasily. I decided maybe the owner was in the back, so I leaned over the counter and called again. Nothing. That's when I noticed the cash register. It wasn't one of those electronic ones. It was the old, mechanical type, the kind I'd only ever seen in movies. A receipt curled out of it, brittle and yellowed, dated July 12, 1982. I touched it with my fingertips, and the paper flaked away like ash. My stomach tightened. I told myself I was just tired, that long-haul driving messes with your head. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a few bills, and laid them on the counter anyway. At least I could say I paid. As I turned to leave, I thought I heard something shift behind the rows of shelves. Not a creak, not the settling of wood, something heavier, deliberate, like a boot scuffing the floor. My mouth went dry. I stood frozen, staring down the aisle, between dusty tins of beans and boxes of cereal that should have expired 20 years ago. "Anyone here?" I said, louder this time. No answer. The sound didn't repeat. Against my better judgment, I took a few steps down the aisle. My boots left marks in the dust, and I noticed no other fresh prints. Whoever had moved, or whatever it was, hadn't disturbed the floor. That detail chilled me more than anything else. I backed out and decided enough was enough. I'd already paid. I just needed to leave. But when I stepped out through the glass door, the air outside felt different. Heavier, like a storm was about to break, though the sky above was clear. My truck sat by the pump, tank full, waiting. But my eyes went to the meter on the pump. It was still ticking, though I'd long since finished filling up. The numbers rolled upward on their own, fuel supposedly pumping, yet the nozzle was back in its holder. I stared at it, a cold knot forming in my gut. I reached out and grabbed the nozzle again. The ticking stopped instantly. Dead silence. I put it back, and the ticking didn't restart. That's when I noticed something else. The receipt printer on the side of the pump slowly spitting out a slip. I pulled it free. The date wasn't 1999. It said July 12th, 1982, same as the receipt in the store. I dropped it and climbed into my truck. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I turned the ignition. The engine started, but faint voices crackled through the CB radio, even though it was switched off. A man's voice, scratchy, like an old recording. "Pump 3 ready, take care of the driver." Then silence. I slammed the radio off, though I knew I hadn't turned it on. My heart thudded so hard I thought I'd choke on it. I threw the truck into gear, desperate to pull away. But the moment I pressed the pedal, I noticed something that froze me in place. In the side mirror, reflected perfectly, the store was not abandoned. Lights were on, The fridge buzzed, and a man in a red attendant's uniform leaned casually against the counter. He was staring straight at me, smiling. I whipped my head around to look directly. Nothing. Just the dust, the broken linoleum, the silence. I turned back to the mirror, and he was still there, only closer now, standing right in the doorway, his head tilted unnaturally. My hands gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "No, no, no," I muttered, and floored it. The truck lurched forward, gravel spitting behind me. I didn't look back again. For a long while, I drove without stopping, my eyes glued to the road, checking my mirrors every few seconds. Nothing followed. The highway stretched empty, endless. Eventually, I slowed, trying to catch my breath. My fuel gauge read full, steady. Against all logic, I told myself I'd just imagined it, a trick of exhaustion and isolation. 2 hours later, I rolled into a roadhouse filled with actual people. I parked, climbed out, and walked into the diner. The chatter, the clatter of cutlery, the smell of food. It grounded me. I almost laughed with relief. I ordered coffee, sat at the counter, and told myself I'd forget about the whole thing. But when the waitress handed me my receipt, my throat closed. The date printed at the top wasn't today. It was July 12th, 1982. I stared at it until she asked if I was okay. My hand shook as I folded it into my pocket. That night, I stayed at a motel nearby. I didn't sleep much. Around 3 in the morning, I went out to smoke a cigarette, hoping the fresh air would calm me. My truck was parked under a flickering light. I leaned against it and lit up. When I exhaled, I saw a slip of paper sticking out from under the wiper blade. My stomach turned to ice. I pulled it free, already knowing what I'd see. It was a receipt from the gas station. Pump 3. July 12th, 1982. And at the bottom, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "We'll take care of the driver." I don't remember dropping the cigarette. I just stumbled back into my room, locked the door, and sat on the bed until sunrise, staring at the paper in my hand. The next day, I drove on, refusing to stop until I hit a major city with crowds and traffic. I told no one. Even now, years later, I can't explain it. I've kept that receipt, folded and worn, hidden in a drawer. Sometimes I take it out just to be sure it's still real, and every time I see the date, it feels like the ground shifts under me. I've driven past Alice Springs since, but I've never once seen that station again. Not the broken sign, not the pump, nothing. Like it was never there. But I swear to you, I didn't imagine it. And every time I fuel up late at night, I check the receipts twice, praying I'll never see that date again. Story number 8. I had been driving for hours when the highway narrowed into a lonely stretch, the kind of road where you feel like you're the only person left awake in the world. My GPS was barely clinging to a signal, the voice directions cutting in and out. But I was sure I was still on the right route. It was just after midnight when I saw the toll booth up ahead, its striped barrier hanging low across the lane like a warning. I slowed down, reached for my wallet, but immediately something felt wrong. There was no light inside the booth, no glow of a monitor, no movement. Just a silent glass box with a chair inside. Empty. I pulled closer, rolling down my window, expecting at least some automated machine or card slot. Instead, I found nothing but a dark window and a little tray for coins that hadn't been cleaned in years. The barrier was lowered completely. No space to slip through. I leaned on the horn, short bursts, hoping to wake whoever might be dozing inside, but the sound seemed to swallow itself in the night. That's when I heard it. A shuffle of feet on gravel, faint but clear, moving around the side of my car. My first thought was that maybe an attendant had stepped out to smoke, or maybe another traveler was waiting nearby. I called out a quick, nervous, "Hola?" my Spanish broken but understandable. No one answered. The footsteps grew slower, more deliberate, like whoever it was didn't want to be seen. I flicked my headlights off and on, trying to catch some glimpse in the mirrors. Nothing. Just the soft scuff of shoes circling. My stomach tightened, my hands gripping the wheel as I considered reversing, but the road behind was narrow, and I couldn't see if anyone else was coming. I tried logic. Maybe the barrier was old, jammed down, and I just needed to wait. I got out my phone to call the emergency number on the back of my toll card. No signal. The bars had disappeared completely. I cursed under my breath, glancing to my left mirror, and that's when I noticed the detail that made my chest go cold. In the glass of the booth, faintly lit by my headlights, I could see my car reflected, and in the reflection someone was standing directly behind it. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The asphalt stretched out empty, the faint hum of my idling engine the only sound. When I turned back to the booth, the reflection was gone too. I told myself I was exhausted, imagining things, but my body wasn't convinced. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it was shaking my rib cage. I decided to step out of the car. Not my smartest move, I know, but I felt trapped, and sitting still was worse than confronting whatever was happening. I opened the door cautiously, my feet crunching onto the gravel. "Hello?" I said louder this time, forcing my voice to steady. The silence pressed back at me. Then, as I walked toward the booth, I heard the footsteps again. Except now they matched my pace, echoing half a beat after, each of mine. I froze. The sound froze too. I took one careful step backward, and the echo followed. Every instinct told me to run, but where? There was nowhere to go but back into the car. So I forced myself to move quickly to the booth's window, cupping my hands against the glass. Inside, the chair sat tucked neatly under the desk, dust gathered thick on its armrests. The monitor was unplugged, no sign that anyone had worked there in years. That's when the barrier rattled behind me. I jumped and turned. The striped arm shuddered as though someone had yanked it, but no one was standing there. The booth's reflection on my car's hood caught my eye again, and this time I saw a shape crouched low beside my rear tire. A person. Head tilted, watching me. I bolted back into the driver's seat, slamming the door, hitting the locks. My breath came in short, wild bursts. The car shook once, just once, as if someone had shoved it hard from behind. I screamed without meaning to, fumbling the gear shift into reverse. My tires squealed, but as I backed up, the barrier didn't move. I couldn't lift it, couldn't ram it without wrecking the front of the car. Then the footsteps started again, not cautious this time, but fast, circling, closer and closer. I could hear the scrape of a hand across my trunk, dragging along the paint. "Leave me alone!" I shouted, though my voice cracked. I hit the horn continuously, a blaring cry into the empty night. For a moment, the sound drowned everything out. When I let go, the footsteps had stopped. I sat trembling, my forehead against the steering wheel, until a sharp tap hit my window. I shot upright. Nothing was there. Another tap, this time on the opposite window. I whipped my head around. Still nothing. Then came the whisper. My own name, spoken perfectly in my own accent. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. The voice came again, softer this time. "Drive." The barrier lifted. Smooth, mechanical, as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. My hands flew to the wheel, and I floored the accelerator, the car shooting forward like it had been waiting to escape. In the rearview mirror, the booth shrank to nothing. But for an instant, I swore I saw someone step out of the shadows beside it, tall and thin, watching. I drove until the next service station, where the lights felt too bright, too normal. I parked crookedly, got out shaking, and staggered inside. The attendant behind the counter gave me a strange look, asking if I was all right. I asked if the toll booths down the road were staffed this late. He blinked at me and said, "What toll booths? That section hasn't used barriers since the late 90s. I stood frozen, the words not sinking in. I described exactly what I'd seen: the striped arm, the booth, the barrier. He shook his head again. "You must have taken a wrong turn. There's no toll like that on this route. Hasn't been for years." I went to the bathroom, splashed, water on my face, and when I came back out, my car was sitting quietly under the fluorescent lights. Except on the driver's side window, smeared into the condensation of my breath, was a single handprint, larger than mine, pressed from the outside. That was the last night I ever drove long distances alone. I finished my trip in daylight, detouring through cities no matter how much longer it took. Sometimes, when I'm parked at a red light, I think I hear it again. The soft shuffle of feet on gravel, circling, waiting for me to stop. And I can never quite shake the memory of that voice, using my own name, whispering that single command that night. Drive. That's the end of our 8 Halloween horror stories. Which one will keep you up tonight? If you made it this far, drop "The Night is Watching" in the comments. And remember, on Halloween, the darkness walks among us.